This is my journey. Inspired one story at a time, a library of leaders was created. It began as a journey to learn. As time went on, it began to grow. All it needed was a platform, and this podcast was created to listen, to inspire, to share. I am a storyteller, and this is my journey. Welcome to another episode of Profiles in Leadership. I'm your host, Steve Anderson, and today our guest is Maximos Lih. He is an executive coach and founder of Emboldened LLC, where he helps small teams scale without losing their edge and leaders grow with purpose and trust. His leadership philosophy was shaped by his grandfather, a self-taught orphan who became a four-star general, who taught him that true greatness is measured by how you make people feel. After immigrating to the U.S. and graduating from UC Berkeley, Maximos joined Google, where he specialized in recruiting top engineering talent before moving to Google Ventures. There, he guided hundreds of founders through rapid growth, witnessing companies like Uber and Flatiron Health scale at remarkable speed. Today, he draws on those experiences to coach the next generation of leaders in building mission-driven, high-performing teams. So, Maximus, welcome to the program today. It's great to have you on.
Oh, lovely to be here.
So give us a little context. We heard a little bit in the bio, but you immigrated to the U.S. So tell us a little bit about where you grew up and kind of some of your early influences and kind of how you got to where you are today.
Yeah, yeah. So I was born in China. My father came here to do his PhD in electrical engineering, so very much a tech and engineering family. And I moved here when I was around 8. I've been in California ever since. So very spoiled to have been surrounded by Silicon Valley and to have seen a lot of those things grow. And then even more fortunate to have been at Google at a time of its fastest growth. We hired 3,000 engineers within my first 9 months when I was on the recruiting team. And
Wow.
then, with Google Ventures, I think I was employee 50. When I joined, the entire portfolio of investments that Google had made was 80 companies. And by the time that I left, we had 470 active companies. I saw Blue Bottle go, from 20 people to exit. I saw Uber grow from 80 to 500 people within 6 months. Nest, we led their Series A and their Series B through acquisition, Stripe, Slack. So it was this beautiful thing of being able to be in a place that was almost too fast with too many signals. But when you're a data guy, the patterns jump out so much faster when you're in that place. And I got so much of my own sense of learnings about what gets a company to the next level and what stalls them, or doesn't contribute to their success, from that place. And then when I started coaching, even more so, right, through COVID, the fact that we are now in a post-agentic AI universe, once again, just all of these like data points that are popping out to the point where I would say any of the best practices that I learned when I was starting my career, based off of Harvard, McKinsey, Deloitte data metrics and studies, that I don't take for granted that they're best practices anymore at all, because those are all from a pre-AI agent way of running teams and managing people.
Yeah. Well, the world has certainly changed, that's for sure. So you kind of have a really storied background. I mean, you immigrated here, you went to UC Berkeley, which is an amazing school, then you get right into Silicon Valley. Um, wow, you're living the dream.
I did it, and I think that I love what I love about Berkeley, and Google and Google Ventures is that they are all places where the expectation was that you were going to figure it out a lot by yourself. And we used to joke that everybody who graduates from Berkeley is incredibly accomplished with incredibly low self-esteem because we always feel like we were getting away with something that wasn't right when we figured something out. And the best example that I have for that is when you take CS3, which is the introduction to computer science at Berkeley, the first day of class, they pop up their presentation screen and it says your homework will be due on Friday. But the entire hour-long lecture had nothing to do with the homework, had nothing to do with syntax, had nothing to do with where the computer lab was. And we were all 17, 18-year-old freshmen. And essentially what the class was is the professor saying, in the course of this class, Introduction to Computer Science, you will learn the fundamentals of what it means to maybe one day create your own computer language. Berkeley, we have in fact created our own computer language called Scheme. That is what all of your homework will be in, not JavaScript, C++, not any of the things that people are actually using in their actual jobs. Scheme.
Oh, great.
And
Okay.
but what we're going to discuss is why create the power that is in a language? What is the moral, ethical, philosophical frameworks that go into actually creating a good one? Because the expectation is that the computer science that we know of today will not remain static, and in fact may be becoming obsolete every day that we learn those old things. So understand the principles behind it and stay very, very agile and adaptable for whatever new thing comes next. And that's day one of your
Yeah.
introduction to CS class. So of course you just come out of it like, oh my gosh, we are overwhelmed, right? Like you learn humility right off the bat because I barely understood the words that were coming at me, and I still got to figure out my homework assignment to pass this class in a language that no one else uses.
I can only imagine. Oh my gosh. So back to your origin story, you talked about in the bio that your grandfather, was an orphan and then became a four-star general in the Chinese military. And I think I read somewhere where you learned to foster kindness, excellence, and belonging, in leadership and kind of from him. Well, when I think of that, when I think of military service and becoming a general, I wouldn't really think of kindness and belonging as part of that leadership journey, but tell us a little bit about what you mean when you wrote that.
The amazing thing about my grandfather, who is very much a family, legend as well as my personal hero, is that it was never a story that was told in my family about a guy who pulled himself up by his bootstraps and made it alone. It was always the story of how systems that you engage in could either help you to thrive or not thrive. My
Mhm.
grandfather was dropped off at a Buddhist temple as a baby. He grew up then in a very small village where most of the people assumed that he would be a liar or a thief, because why else would you be abandoned at birth unless you had bad genes? And he started to figure out, how to apprentice himself in some of these like village bakeries and small businesses. And every single time he would just encounter people who made assumptions about him because of what they had interpreted about, his upbringing, his story of abandonment. And one day it was like, this is the last time I'm going to be accused of thievery. And he ran away, lied about his age, and joined the military. And it was
Mhm.
really in the military, right, that he taught himself to read. He taught himself math. He is the best dressed person that we know of in my family. My dad's an electrical engineer, right? So like, not a lot of great clothes there. But if you didn't buy clothes for yourself until you were an adult, and everything else that you had were uniforms, you had to learn things about what it meant to dress well. And so he would be, sketching things in his notebook about French fashion or British fashion because of the war. And all of those things were in my family indications of being in a small village versus being in the military changed nothing about my grandfather's potential, his desire to learn, his curiosity first, aptitude. But in the military, somebody authorized permission for him to learn how to read from another soldier. Somebody authorized permission during free time, and somebody volunteered their free time to teach him to do math and accounting. And it was that investment, which otherwise would not have been possible. It wasn't like you could sign up for classes in the military, change everything about his trajectory. And so for us, it was always about the systems that could actually create those modes of thriving and the leaders that chose to invest in people beyond, sort of like their pay scale because of their aptitude or because of their curiosity and cared enough to notice those things to actually make those roots possible.
Yeah, it's an amazing story, and I'm sure that you feel as, two generations away from that, it's like what a gift that he gave to you, by doing what he did and sacrificed and, worked hard and so on, and then your dad and then you. It's an amazing story. I also read that when you work on your coaching with clients, that you talk a lot about building Olympic teams, not championship teams. So you talk about gold, not seasons. So tell us a little bit about that philosophy. I have not heard that before, so I'm intrigued.
I would say that this is particularly targeted towards small teams or startup teams. And I find that what is unique about startups, at least the startups that we've invested in or I work with, is that you have your ability to attract employees and great employees really comes from your sense of mission and purpose. Uh, and the fact that people are willing to take huge pay cuts sometimes, right, for ownership. And everything kind of aligns around the vision of what you actually build together. And that's so different from public companies or large scale companies who have the ability to not just throw money at problems, but, optimize for the 99 percentile of pay bands in order to bring in the top tier talent. But then those talent actually come into a much larger set of processes, sometimes bureaucracies, right, communication infrastructure. And it fundamentally changes the way that you think about what performance looks like for your team. In an Olympic team, you're hiring predominantly amateurs, not known people. You train as hard as you can. You make little to no money. You do it for pride, right? And the goal is that you get to the place where you're actually competing in the games and you medal and you win pride for the team that you work with, the team that you come from. And you don't come back and next year charge more to do the next Olympics. You go do TED Talks or something, right? Whereas in championship teams, right, and you think about like, what Kobe and LeBron had done, where they've just said, like, I will play the best that I can to choose a winning team, and then I will demand agent rights, right? So that I can be a free agent and command the highest earning power for the next championship. So the minute that you win your championship, you go back to training for the next one, or you go back to looking for the team to win the next one. Very rarely are you saying, "Oh, I won my first championship. Let's go do TED Talks." It's not the way that the championships teams are built. And the mission and purpose of the championship team, professional NBA, NFL, where those types of leagues are not predominantly around purpose. It's much more around prestige or legacy in a way that Olympic teams are not necessarily asking the same question. And so if you're a small team, you need to know what game you're playing, right? So I'm looking for the top 3% of genetic anomalies anywhere in an Olympic team. I can't pay them a lot. I better give them purpose, pride, connection. And oftentimes I have to fire very quickly because there's only a limited amount of bandwidth and resources that I have to get this team together for our one shot. In an Olympic team, you're much more resource rich. The camaraderie is much more about strategy, right? It's much more about gamesmanship. It's a different kind of rallying power because of the fact that you're going to come back next
Mm,
year, next year, next year with different optimized compositions of teams to win that championship over and over again.
that's fascinating. When you've had this experience with working for so many different founders through your Google ventures and so on, so you've seen a lot. Now you're coaching a lot of founders as well. So, what do founders do that kind of sabotage their team sometimes? What mistakes do you see that you kind of hopefully help them avoid?
So I think if we go back to Olympic team versus championship teams, and I'll just add that part of the difference is in the measurement of success, right? Public companies have to play like championship teams because Wall Street is judging them on their year over year, quarter over quarter success. That is like championships. You come back the next quarter, you win again, you win again, you win again. The startups are hoping for an IPO or one specific exit within a 7 to 10 year time frame, right? And so that's not a quarter over quarter deal in the same way as it's a one shot to the gold medal deal, and the team compositions are very different. So I would say that the first thing that I oftentimes need to audit when I'm working with the client is, do you understand the business that you're in? Do you understand the end goal that you're going towards? So that's sort of like one, right? If you're trying to think about your growth in terms of quarter over quarter, you're not thinking enough about the exit, which is what your board and your investors and your employees are actually hoping for. You dilute your energy and momentum when you don't understand with clarity the business that you're in. The second thing that happens a lot of times, and I think Steve, you must do this as well with your clients, is what is the right level of hierarchy, span of control, executive team that fits where you are today and where you're going, but not too much further than that.
Yeah.
Right? I've seen so many cases where a company raises their Series A, they're 40 people, they made it from zero to between 10 or 20, ARR revenue a year, and they're shooting for the next tranche, 50 million. And everybody on their team, like the people that have like friends and family, right, predominantly individual contributors who have really good strategic insights, but they're player coaches, they're hands-on leaders, very little investment in people management. And then they raise that number, and then they're bored or they think, oh, I got to grow up as a company, which is totally true. And they go, and what got me here won't get me there. Also totally true. Let me hire somebody who is a 30-year veteran from Oracle, unlikely to be successful. Right.
Yeah.
Because the gap, I mean, first of all, even the memory of what it was like for that person to remember going from 10 million to 50 million is like a vague dot in the rearview mirror. They don't remember what it was like. That could have been, 15, 20 years ago that they really did that kind of build out, and the world is different now. But two, they're used to being at the top of three or four different layers of management. And now you're bringing them in to play first line manager and true VP with a CEO that's not accustomed to working with real VPs at all. Like it always ends up to be sort of like a really friction-filled set of cultural and processes and decision making. It's a lot of thrash. So I feel like that becomes a place to where my personal preference is if you are not trying to go from 10 to 100, and you're going from 10 to 50 or 10 to 30, train up the people that you have in those places first, especially because there's so many good AI tools now. Don't be so quick to double the size of your team. Look at what you're leveraging with your AI tools first, which means you don't need somebody who's working at that high of an executive level. Um, so train up the people that you have into true manager and leaders rather than bring in somebody who's coming from, a post-exit or Series D, a 500-person team, exec level horsepower for what you're doing right now. It doesn't set them up for success, and you're not ready as a CEO to actually manage or supervise that person well.
Think you made a good point in there too, and I think the key word was train. So I think a lot of companies
Mhm.
they start out small, they get bigger, and then they don't think of putting in a leadership development program until they're big, where
Mhm.
in reality you should be doing that all along the way so that you have people that are able to move into those positions you just described.
Well, and I think that starts with CEOs giving themselves permission to be trained themselves.
Yes.
Because I knew what it meant to be a CEO founder of a 12-person team. I've never been the CEO founder of a 50-person team, much less 50 going to a 150-person team. And so I think that, the CEO not giving themselves the investment to level up as a leader also then trickles down to fewer, less and less investment in the leaders under them.
And I think it's also true that in those times when you're starting a company and you're a founder, that you're so busy, it's so chaotic that you don't think you have time to train people as you go. Yet if you do that and then you grow, then you have a bunch of people that don't know what they're doing as well as they should, right?
Totally. Yeah. I,
Yeah.
I sometimes will make this point that, when you're a small company fighting for survival every day, you have to close every deal, you have to put out every fire, and everybody gets rewarded for it. Because the hero is the person who puts out the fires, right? It's the person who came back on a Sunday night and closed the deal. And then all of a sudden you get to a point where it's like, well, I'm not trying to just survive anymore. I'm trying to become one of the top three players in the marketplace. And I'm not supposed to be rewarding people for putting out fires anymore. I'm supposed to be building a fire department. But we very rarely give ourselves credit for the fires that don't happen. And so now you've got this skewed reward and incentive system for actually where the company needs to go.
I think you used that you hinted on it right there, but you talk about emerging a company from hero to host.
Yeah.
So that's kind of what you're saying. So expand on that a little bit more.
Yeah, I think that, you know, and if we put a little bit of what's going on right now into that mix, you look at companies like Amazon, Meta, um, IBM. Most companies are actually really condensing the amount of management layers between an individual contributor and the leadership team. I think Deloitte did a report that said where it used to be a best practice to say one manager should have 8 direct reports that they're supervising and doing one-on-ones with. As of 2025, it's now 1 to 12, estimated to be 1 to 20 by the year 2028. So we're really, firing middle managements, compressing these layers, and sort of assuming that smart ICs who are really good at problem solving, they'll just step up and fill those lead positions where middle management used to serve. And
Mm,
the problem with that, of course, is that to your point, you haven't trained any of these architect, tech leads, ICs to be able
right.
to do that thing, right? You've underestimated the amount of admin tax that it takes for a VP to be, a manager 3 as opposed to a manager 6, or even in the worst case scenario, a first line manager that's also trying to be a VP. And then lastly, what you do is you have people who made their careers off of being the best problem solver in the room. And then you gave them people that were their dotted line supervision. And what did they do? They go into every meeting asking the question, what's a problem? Where can I break the bottleneck? How can I unblock you? And mentally, psychologically, it's a very short jump between my meetings are about fixing problems to my people are my problems. Right? Like
Yeah.
it's a very, very short jump because you get in the place of looking at problems and then all of a sudden now your tendency is to micromanage everything to make sure that you're catching problems as opposed to being surprised by wins or achievements or delegation or empowerment. And I think that that's where yeah, because I just spent the last X number of my career being the problem solver, and now you put me in a place where I'm supposed to I'm supposed to like not solve problems. I'm supposed to empower people. Like, how do I actually make that switch? And it becomes very, very toxic because everybody who's in that position does not like their job.
Yeah.
Who wants to be the person who's just constantly cleaning up after other people that I manage, right? Two, you end up setting your targets very low because you're protecting against the lowest denominator, and you're spending most of your time trying to coach low performers into some sort of functional, like, aptitude instead of working with the highest performers to see how far they can blow out the ceiling. And I think that is the difference between, a hero versus a host, right? The hero comes into the room and says like, what do you need? What do you need? What do you need? I'm doing all that work. And the more people I have to supervise, the more I'm resentful with the fact that I have to do all this work that they're supposed to just know better to do by themselves. But a host is actually saying the best kind of parties or the best kind of gathering are the ones where I get the right people in the room and they just talk about cool things. I don't have to put conversation cards on the table. You know, I tell
Yeah.
them, make yourself comfortable, and they'll just do it because everybody is a grown up. But what I'm able to do in that kind of situation is really take pride in, yeah, if I put the 6 people next to a campfire, we will talk about vulnerable things. If I put them in front of a game, they won't talk to each other at all, right? You can create the environments that get you to something that actually surprises you because of how great it was. And those are the places where when you're fighting for survival, of course, you're in a scarcity mindset. Every day is a fight. You have to be the hero. But if you're actually trying to scale,
Hmm.
it's a different identity altogether.
And it's a very different skill set too, to have that. And that's why we come back to the training. I like the word host. That makes a lot of sense. I've used it with my clients a lot as facilitator. It's like all of a sudden now you're not the answer guy. You're
Yep.
the facilitator of all these brilliant people you have, that you're managing, and you facilitate how to bring things out. I
Yeah.
think
Yeah.
that's
Yeah. Yeah.
that's a good way to look at it, and I like how
Yep.
you went from hero to host. I like
I
that.
had that conversation recently with a leader that I was coaching, and he had gotten some feedback that says, "Oh, you always shut down different people's ideas in the conversation." And I was watching some of the videos of his meetings, and it occurred to me, you know, when you were an architect at the company, you used to go into every meeting and then you would fight to be the loudest voice in the room because you had better ideas than other people and you were afraid that they would take a dumb idea over your idea. But now you're the manager. And if you were still the person who was the loudest talker in the room, of course you would be shutting down other people's ideas. You have to be the person that everybody is fighting for attention from and be very quiet most of the meeting because you're the person who is making the decision now. You're not the person who is fighting for persuasion to make the best decision. And it was like such a light bulb moment, right? It's like you have to host a meeting, right? You have to create the space for that, and then they're supposed to be fighting for your attention because that's how that role and that title in that office now works. So it's exactly the same thing.
Well, it's kind of like that's kind of leadership 101 that's been, for years that's how we've kind of looked at it. But what do you think is new and different in leadership training? What do we have to do now in this new age of AI and other things that are going on that we have to do a little differently than we've done in the past?
I'm, yeah, I have many thoughts about this question, but I'm curious, Stephen, in your work, what are some of the things that you've seen different, like work differently now than pre-COVID, let's say?
Well, I think that everyone, and I'm not an expert on AI by any means, but I think what happens is that people think, oh, AI, we need to integrate that. We need to integrate it. And so we're trying to embrace it. But yet by doing that, that alone doesn't work. You need to figure out how that helps as opposed to it being some kind of a savior looking thing. It's
Mhm.
more like, what can we do to use it? We still have the human component. We still need to lead. We still need to facilitate. We still need to do those things we just talked about. And AI is a tool to help us. And I think some people, if they're afraid of AI or they don't understand AI that much, they don't really know how to integrate it into the company.
Yeah, I feel like, all of us or many of us are tired of talking about the MIT report that came out a couple of years ago, which said that, over $4 billion per year were spent on corporate pilots and investments into AI, of which literally, 4% generated like any kind of ROI. So 95% generated zero, not like neutral ROI, but zero ROI for all the money that they spent.
Wow.
So I agree, right? Like I feel like the companies that come to me, they look at that report and they're doing three things, right? One, they're getting very anxious about having a AI strategy for the future so that their business doesn't get obsolete. That is very much your hero manager. I want to be the guy who brings in the winning strategy. You have people who are saying, let's just democratize this, give everybody a $500 ChatGPT expense account. Like make the tool 10x your job. And that creates a lot of waste because if I had an analyst who used to produce four amazing business insights papers a week, and now I say produce 40, great business insight papers a week, I don't have time to read 40 papers. I don't have time to tell them 40 important business questions to solve, but they got to use up their $500 ChatGPT account to make it feel like they're being productive. And so it's just creating like a lot of waste. And I think the last, group is, oh, let's just wait and see. But every day that you waste and see, the market is moving without you, right? I think that the latest research has been today, 53 to 57% of all web traffic is bots. So the internet is no longer human, the internet is agentic. Well, if you were right devising marketing campaigns for a human-based click system, you definitely just get scammed by bots, right? And so I think that those are the places where nobody has figured it out, but those three approaches don't make any sense for the world that has already, started to develop under our feet. What I think is interesting is uh one, if what I have are great employees that instead of hiring three junior people, manage seven AI agents and AI guardian agents and AI supervisor agents under their own specific instance of ChatGPT. Do I pay that person 3x what a typical employee would make according to my compensation survey? Because they have saved me seven headcount. How do I actually protect them from being able to take that away to either open their own consultancy, charge back, additional cash, right, for the same job that they used to be doing, or take these agents to a competitor because I can't copyright the things that are in their brain that produce that suite of AI teams in the first place. And so I think that that's like one question, right? And I think the second question, which is around what does human IP mean in this age and in the org structures that we're building today, is the place where managers are not spending enough time. There is IP in your best employees. Those are the only people who should be training your AI models. Do you even know who those people are? Because it's not equal. And it may not actually even be the best, most productive person that has the best judgment. that has the best decision-making power. How do you actually identify that and then use that to be part of your leadership strategy? I think IKEA actually did a really good job of this. That was this blend of like business acumen, empathy, human first, where, and I think you might be familiar with the story. IKEA rolled out a chatbot customer service agent called Billy,
Yeah.
named after the bookcase. I think they had something like 400, customer service agents at the time that would, in any traditional system, would have become a cost center ready for layoffs because the Billy performed very well. Within the first 6 months of rollout, it started to take on something like 60% of routine customer service inquiries. Things like, where is this in stock? Where's my shipment? Stuff like that. But they had a VP of learning and development who said, well, wait a minute. I have 600 people, right? This entire group of human customer service agents who already care about the customer, know a lot about our inventory, and are closer to how people like to use the things that they buy. What if we ask the question, so Billy, the chatbot, is taking 60% of like customer calls. What's going on with the 40% that they can't handle? And it turns out those 40% were all about like, hey, help me decorate my room. Help me create a design. I just bought this thing. I have 4 kids. I want something that will allow them to play, but also not make my living room look like a mess. How do I make my home more comfortable? I'm a first year new grad. I'm setting up my own home for the first time. I want to feel like a grown-up home, not a, college dormitory. And so they basically put those two data points together. They leveraged the human IP of knowing taste, judgment, right? And created an entire remote interior design business unit for IKEA that within the first year generated 3% of gross revenue globally, estimated to be 10% by the year 2028.
Yeah, it's incredible. So basically, what they're doing is reskilling those people so that, what
Yeah.
you see a lot is these big companies with these huge layoffs.
Yep.
So
Absolutely. Yeah.
what IKEA did differently was take those people they were going to lay off, but reskilled them to add to their experience and
Mhm.
ultimately their bottom line.
100%. Yeah. I think people who are making a lot of org design decisions based off of efficiency are ultimately playing the wrong game. In the next 3 years, everybody will buy the same tools. Efficiency will just become a commodity. But judgment is something that is held within human institutional knowledge, human taste, human decision making. There is an IP in that that will create businesses that you did not imagine. And the leaders that are really winning, right, at the AI game understand that, and they're building leadership structures around it.
When you talk about AI and it's someone like that has small business or individuals or whatever, we're using ChatGPT or Claude. Do you see that companies, once they get to a certain size, will develop their own internal AI as opposed to using a broader source AI?
I think that to build it themselves is still a very high cost and high specialization approach. So I think that we will still be using things like Anthropic or Cursor, ChatGPT. What I think has been interesting for a lot of the small companies that I work with is creating their own AI frameworks. So it's almost like instead of Steve, I give you a budget, you have an agent and a ChatGPT instance that houses a lot of your own context and knowledge, but is unique to you, and then I have my own, and our AI agents could produce things that like fight each other or conflict with each other or miss each other's information context. There is a company-wide AI brain. That's your AI framework or AI harness that then keeps all of the other ones accountable. There was a legal firm that I ended up working with where they had brought in some AI tools to do analysis and discovery. And they thought, well, this is going to be a really great way to train my first year associates and make them so much more productive. So I'll just give them this tool and they can write briefs for clients instead of having to do it manually. And unfortunately, it turns out first year associates don't have a good judgment on quality. So massive hallucinations, a lot of like errors, right? The partners will be taking the briefs on the way to the customer meeting and saying like, "Oh crap, like what is this nonsense? Stop the meeting. I need to go back and do all this cleanup." And what eventually ended up happening was they had said, well, maybe we just won't hire first year associates. We'll make the, junior partners do their own work with this tool because they do have judgment. But that was a very expensive and costly way to use your junior partners. And so what we did instead was we had second year associates create the brain for the entire law firm. This is what these clients look for. This is the state that these precedents, the judge will allow for what we're doing. Here are the edge cases where something is an exception, and they build that into an AI layer, and then AI agents get distributed, basically sent out from those layers into the first years. And so it's like the second years are using AI to help train the first years and quality control it.
Yeah, interesting. So going back a little bit, talking about you working with small companies with founders and they're doing well and so they double in size and triple in size, and then all of a sudden chaos hits. Where does that come from? Where do you see the problems being, and what advice do you give to clients to hopefully avoid that time when it just becomes chaotic?
I don't think that most companies actually should be doubling or tripling their headcount within a year. In the same way that it was very important that they do when I was working, for example, at Google Ventures. My sort of like theme phrase that we would go into companies would be if I can get you from 50 to 150 without breaking your quality bar, 150 to 500 without breaking your culture, you're going to be fine. And now I feel like anytime you're actually thinking about passing the 150 mark, you should think very, very carefully about whether you need more people or more tools.
Mhm.
Um, and it's just because the tools are getting really, really good. And if you don't actually know how to integrate people into your culture, your systems, well, then you bring in people and all it does is create linear management tax that you have now eliminated because you don't have as many managers and you don't plan to hire as many managers as you used to. So, I mean, like to have one manager training 20 new grads within a 3-month period is a very, very hard job, right? It should be 1 to 4 because they have to learn what it means to be professional. They have to learn how it means to like the quality for your job, and they have to learn what quality looks like for your company. So I just think that companies should be slowing down the way that they hire. Of course, I have my own trauma from that because I helped so many companies do layoffs during COVID because they all overhired. And so I'm much, much more cautious about the people tax, the, burn and the expense of hiring people that you don't know how to use properly. And therefore don't invest in. Those are not the systems that would have made my grandfather great.
Yeah,
So
yeah.
I think that that's one thing, right? And it's like if you're not interested in building out your management layer, be really slow to grow your team. All right. If you're not confident that you have mentors that are because of their performance review process incentivized to help other people as opposed to hoard all the work for themselves so that they become indispensable, don't double the size of your team. Right. There are all of these things that actually like if your reward incentive system does not promote cross-cultural collaboration, don't double the size of your team. You're just scaling dysfunction. You're just scaling bottlenecks and silos, and those things will kill your business.
When I think of your story and looking at what you do, you have a lot of experience helping businesses do things and investing in businesses and so on. Now you've kind of made the move from, investor operator side more to becoming an executive coach. So I'm wondering why you did that. I would assume the earning potential isn't quite the same. So what was your motivation to do that?
When I was in a venture capital firm, I was part of the IP and value proposition of my firm. So the goal was uh, essentially to one, maximize the returns on the checks that Google writes to the startups that is in its portfolio, and two, attract or help to close very competitive deals because of what we were able to offer companies to help them be successful. And therefore, it was not in my interest and potentially part of my non-compete and non-disclosure agreement to not share a lot of what I had learned with people that didn't get a check from Google. But as I became and more sort of like senior and an institution in my own side, through my time with GV, I realized that it wasn't always the best ideas about the checks. I realized that so much of 80% of the portfolio were all Harvard and Stanford grads, right? 80% of the portfolio were people who had second degree connections to somebody that was in the partnership. These were relationship businesses. And a known issue, right? Not a lot of women founders get invested in. Not a lot of people who are first-time college graduates got investments in there. And I think when I came through COVID, I just realized, wow, everything about people, leadership is getting reinvented. And I had to ask myself the question, do I want to be right, a hero or a host? Do I want to be somebody who goes in there and helps people fix things? Or do I actually want to be somebody who creates a community of people who are trying to figure it out in a much more open way that wasn't tied to a particular board seat or a particular investment check? And I just thought it's so much more fun to be a builder in that kind of a community sense. And I had to go through my own identity transition, right? And then I went and found my own coach to think through how was I going to navigate that, because to your point, it's really easy to go into a company and say, I come from the board, I come from Google Ventures, and have them listen to me. It's much, much more difficult to go into a company and say, well, my name is Maximus Lih, and I have a lot of experience, but you have no reason to trust me. Give me like 30 minutes to 3 days to earn your trust, because I'm absolutely invested in your success.
So now you're in the executive coaching world. What does a great client look like, or what does a relationship between a coach and a client look like to you that you're saying, okay, this is what I really enjoy?
I love seeing um, the transformation that can happen in somebody. And it brings me a lot of joy sometimes when I get a text from somebody who says like, oh, I had this really difficult conflict resolution thing that I had to facilitate or navigate, and I channeled my inner Maximus and I asked these three questions and I was able to get through it, and I didn't have to jump on an emergency call to role play or talk them through it. And most of the time my response was like, that's not my voice you're channeling, that's your voice, right? That's
Yeah.
you as the VP, right, that you're channeling. And don't underestimate that truth. So I love that. I love seeing actually going into a company where I've been coaching leaders remotely for a while to get a vibe on the team, to take a pulse, to do the 360, and actually seeing that host like come to life, to sit in a staff meeting and have the person who is chairing the meeting be quite like uh reluctant to interfere with the conversations and the brainstormings that's going on, and then at the end say, wow, I didn't expect it to go like this is even better than I thought it was going to be.
Yeah.
So I think that those types of things you can really see. We spend 60-70% of our time in our life at our workplace, and to be part of systems that are not trying to hold you to a particular cap in what you can do, especially in an age that's full of uncertainty. We're really open to trusting, thought like experiments and empowerment. Those are the types of things that you once again, right, I go back to, if the reason that I feel so strongly about systems is the fact that I benefited from my grandfather having systems that invested in him, then when I go out and see like my version of systems empowering people come to life because of the people that I had safe space conversations with, that is everything that I would have ever wanted.
How do you find clients, or how do clients find you?
I'd say I'm really lucky. I have clients that refer me to other clients, and that's always such a compliment. Like, thank you so much for honoring me by introducing me to other people. And then a fair number of people find me through LinkedIn or conversations like this. All right, so I'd say like VC partners send me clients, LinkedIn and podcasts send me clients, and former clients or current or active clients send me referrals.
Okay. I read somewhere where you said that you want to help leaders be a good ancestor.
Mhm.
What does that mean?
Well, I think that there are two interesting things that we're seeing right now in the marketplace. One of them is that companies are increasingly full of four generations of employees, everything from boomers all the way through to Gen Alpha. That might actually be five generations, actually, now that I think about it. Um, And boomers are understandably staying in the workplace longer and longer, which means that for somebody who is between, let's say, 35 and 45, to be able to find opportunities to experiment with their own sense of executive presence and leadership, they need people who will invest in them and give them the opportunity for that kind of exposure. The older model of, oh, this person will retire and then I get to step up, it's a much longer time, and the gap between skill set and qualification is widening. So when I work with leaders, I try to be very generous about saying, like, your job as host is to pull people up and let them have a shot, even if they're not ready for the full job, because you have to think about that kind of succession in real time. And you have to think about that succession not as succession, not as when you leave the workplace, this person will take over, but as you go into part-time work or as you step into an advisor role, they're going to be able to take on this work. So I think that that's one thing. And then two, I do think that leaders that own systems change the way that somebody sees themselves as a high performer or not, sees themselves as creative or not, sees themselves as capable or not, and sees themselves as replaceable by AI or indispensable in an AI age or not. And those are also legacies that we pass on to the new grads that are coming into the workplace and the people that are sort of in more junior levels below us.
Said in a different way, I think what you're saying there is one of the leaders' biggest jobs is to help other leaders grow. And I know I've had experience that when what you referred to just a minute ago, where you have somebody who maybe doesn't have all the credentials and doesn't have all the experience, but yet they have the qualities, they have the values, they have the potential. And if you put time into them and mentor them and train them, those people usually turn out to be much better leaders for the company down the road than somebody that you bring in that has all the credentials that perhaps you don't know as well.
Oh yeah, and sometimes leaders for other companies down the road, right? You know, when I think about Google, Google has spawned so many generations of startups. Because Google has spawned executives that go to other companies. Sheryl Sandberg was an associate PM at Google that then became the COO at Facebook. You can't deny that there is a different kind of ancestry when we think about generations of companies, not just within your own company as well.
For sure. Well, Maximus, in anticipation of our discussion today, we've covered a lot, but what haven't I asked you that you want to be sure to get in the program today?
I think that one thing that I would just double click on is when we look across the ecosystem, at least in tech right now, you have people removing those middle management layers in the name of efficiency, but they're not supplementing it with training, development, investment in the leaders that they're trying to promote into some of those management roles, informally or casually. And I think that that's a mistake. I think that management is going to become more valuable in the age of AI, not less valuable. And primarily, I think that it's because quality continues to be a big problem for AI, period. And so I think the people who say, well, it's really going to be about leadership. I don't think that it's wrong to say that leadership will become more complicated and more important in an AI age. But so long as hallucinations and quality control is a default thing to protect against in AI, right? The more people that are on AI, the more scams, right, are possible. The more people are using AI, the more fraud vulnerabilities are possible. There's a quality thing that's built into how this tool is designed. Um, and quality is oftentimes a management issue. So that's one thing, like think very carefully about how you invest in your management layer and how you invest in your leadership layer because they are not the same and they don't replace each other. And so I think that that's one thing that, especially if you're over 50 people as a company, you're going to get into a place where your span of control is going to be 12 to 20 people. And if you don't ask, what is my quality mechanism and who are the managers that are going to like protect in a host way, especially around that, as opposed to a fire fast anytime I see mistakes way out of that, you will put yourself in a place where there's a lot of risk to your customer trust because the quality is not true.
It's a very good point. I think too that when we look at companies too, again, you and I are on the same page on this leadership development and mentoring, and we need structure around that to help that happen. We just can't assume it's going to happen by osmosis.
Mhm.
And yet, when anybody gets busy and it gets chaotic, like we talked about earlier, things get crazy, it's the first thing they say is, well, we don't have time for that right now, or
Right.
we don't want to spend the money for that right now. We'll do that later. And I think that's a big mistake. I think it's got to be from the get-go and ongoing to really prepare yourself for the growth that we're talking
Yeah.
about.
I couldn't agree more. And I go back to, if there is such a thing as human IP, then the people in your company that have the most context about your business should be the people that you promote into leadership or management first. And I can make, a really easy case for that. Like one, they're going to be better at training your AI models. Two, that you don't need to onboard them. It's cheaper to, hire somebody like Steve to coach them than it would be to hire a 300 to 450K a year executive that may be overshot for what your company is doing right now. Um, but it just feels like the sort of like prestigious answer is, oh, let's go and hire somebody famous into this role instead of training up the people who have been really at the forefront of your strategy all along.
How many stories have we seen where, especially bigger companies, they go out and they hire that knight on the white horse that's going to come in and solve all the problems, and that just never happens.
Oh yeah, I mean, and once again, if you don't know how to manage that person, you could be setting that person up for failure because you expect them to be the savior, but you don't know how to integrate them properly into your team.
For sure. Well, at this point in the interview, I always ask my guests the same common question, and that question is, in relation to leadership, what is a pearl of wisdom that you could leave us with today?
Uh, I would say that if you are a leader, if you are a leader navigating a lot of the complexities, go places where you can learn more in 3 months than other people learn in a year, and you'll be part of building what the future of employment could become. And I genuinely believe that. Like, don't go into your work situation, your promos, your job opportunities with that problem-solving mindset. Go into it with a curiosity mindset, and you will find yourself surprisingly in empowerment, individually.
Well said. Well, what's in the future for you? Still just doing what you're doing, building your client base, helping more people? Do you have any big initiatives or great ideas that you're gonna do in the next few months or year?
Yeah, I'm going to Hong Kong to do some work with the conference over there, and I think that it will be really interesting to hear how companies in Asia are actually changing their leadership structures to look a little bit more like Silicon Valley in the 90s. So I'm interested in always learning more about what interesting people are doing in leadership. And I would say that I rolled out an offering recently where instead of going in as sort of a fractional chief people officer and working with leaders, I will coach sort of like the leadership team that you want to up level. So I was like, oh yeah, we can put together a package where I'll just train all four of your directors into exec leadership roles, and I'll help you set up what that staff meeting would look like. And it gives me a lot uh, of joy to be able to see that we're not just working one-on-one, but also being able to see them work collaboratively as a functional staff unit.
And if people want to reach out to you, is LinkedIn the place to go?
Yeah, LinkedIn is where I do most of that.
Okay, and just so that those that are listening, your last name is Lee, but it's spelled Lih.
That's correct.
Okay, great. Well, Maximus, this has been really interesting. I love your idea of the curiosity mindset heading into these leadership roles. I couldn't agree more. I think we're on the same page on those things. And so it's been great talking to you today. Sounds like you've had some wonderful and exciting experiences, and future looks bright. So thanks for coming on the show today. I really appreciate it.
Lovely to be here. Thanks, Steve.
Okay, take care. Have a good rest of your day.
You as well.
Bye bye. Thank you for listening to another episode of Profiles in Leadership. To listen to all my interviews, subscribe to Profiles in Leadership with Steve Anderson on Apple Podcasts, iTunes, and many other popular podcast platforms. Some of these interviews are on video, and you can search YouTube for Profiles in Leadership with Steve Anderson. You can also access the entire library of interviews on my website, orange.coaching.com, and that is orangetheword.coaching.com, and go to the Media Center and click on Podcasts or Video Gallery. You can also enter the website from pilpodcast.com.